you are an entrepreneur, a professional, a speaker, or a coach, and although you've come a long way, it's time for you to take it to the next level. We've got you. This is the Author to Authority podcast. We'll help you use authority and influencer marketing to build your business stronger and faster by publishing a book. You'll hear from guests that are thought leaders in sales, marketing, networking, communication, social media, promotion, and business leadership. Let's do it. This is the Author to Authority podcast. And now your host, the extraordinary word ninja, Kim Thompson-Pinder.
Welcome to the Author to Authority podcast. Today is a wonderful day because I have Deirdre Tshien, and hopefully I said that correctly. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have Deirdre on the show is she is an amazing podcast person. And she has grown her podcast like astronomically, but she also helps other people with their podcasts. And if you've been listening to the Author to Authority podcast for a while, you know that one of the ways to gain authority in your business is to either have your own podcast or be on other people's podcasts. So Deirdre is a serial entrepreneur, having founded and led 7 businesses across 5 industries in the last 9 years. Though if you're watching this on video, she doesn't even look old enough to have done that, and has navigated the entire spectrum of experience and emotions, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, that phrase, Deirdre, I always ask all of our authors at the end of the show, what was the good, the bad, and the ugly of publishing your book? So I love that in your introduction. That comes with starting, running, and closing and exiting businesses. With her hands-on experience in successfully growing her businesses to 6 and 7 figures, she now helps experts who podcast amplify their message and build their movements. She's also the host of Grow My Podcast Show. Welcome, Deirdre.
Thank you so much, Kim.
I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you become an entrepreneur? And how did you come to help entrepreneurs with their own podcasts?
Yes. Oh, gosh, there's so many questions in that. And I'm like, where do I even begin? How did I become an entrepreneur? Okay, so as I mentioned, 9 years ago, I started my first business. So by way of background, I am Aussie. I'm Australian, but I live over in the States now. I'm here in New York City. And I grew up very much, I was kind of tiger mummed, like I was like, I'm Asian. So it was very much like, you've got to study hard, you've got to get good grades. I played the piano. I was tutored from a really young age, all of those things, because fair enough, my parents were first migrants into Australia and they did that to give us a better life, better opportunities. And so I kind of, was very conditioned to follow a particular path. I was either going to become a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. That was kind of like, that was one of those paths. And I think I disappointed my dad because I didn't become a doctor. I instead went into banking, which is like, I studied a law degree, went into banking, and I was kind of hating my life, like I think a lot of people who go into corporate. And it was, my quarter life crisis that I was having. And I was like, I need to figure this out. I need to do something else. And at the same time, my then boyfriend, partner, now husband, was also going through something similar. He was studying medicine and was just miserable. And from there, we decided to start our first business, which was in hospitality, actually. We started a dessert bar because my husband, Ash, had, really stumbled upon this passion for baking and really experimenting with food. So we did that, grew that brand. It's called the Choc Pot. Grew that brand to 5 locations. We also opened a burger restaurant alongside that. We had 2 of those.
Because you don't have enough work.
Yeah, I know. But it's like one of those things that happens, right? Like you just keep going. And what I found, and it was actually something that happened at the end of 2018 that kind of like snapped me out of that particular hamster wheel that we sort of almost created for ourselves. What happened at the end of 2018 was we found out that one of our store managers had been stealing from us. And we're talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars, like a lot of money. And it was kind of like, that was that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, is this what we want to be doing? Like, do we want to continue doing this path that we're on? And I very quickly was like, I think I don't want to. And, my husband and I had a really, really good, robust conversation about this. And we're so supportive of each other. And he was like, yeah, like he honestly, it was kind of stemming from him and his passion, but he was burning out as well. And that passion that he had was not, it was no longer fun anymore for him. So we decided, I was actually exploring this other idea, this fashion technology idea with another friend, co-founder of mine. And it was in that moment where I was like, well, you know what? Stuff it. Why don't we just pick up and move overseas? Like, why in the world not? Yes. So that was what was going through in my mind, in my naive mind. And so, but like I'm very much an action taker. And once I make a decision, I'm just like, yep, we're all in. So we did it. We moved over here to New York City. I was like, yep, we have this fashion technology idea. We're better to explore it than in New York City.
Of course.
Right. And my co-founder, actually, Bonner, actually moved over with us, which was amazing. So we were like, this is going to be so much fun. And we decided to explore this idea. We started testing it with all of these different people. We actually went to like NYU campus, Columbia campus, Wall Street, just talking to young professionals. And what we found out after 3 to 4 months was that it was not a big enough problem that we were solving for. It was not going to work. So we failed it. We failed that idea. And then we're like, oh, okay, well, we're over here in New York City, one of the most expensive cities to live in the world, with no business, no real income. What are we going to do? And, it's kind of one of those things where everything happens for a reason. And I actually ran into an old acquaintance of mine, who was also Aussie, but he was now currently in New York City. And he was actually helping a UK chocolate brand retail business expand in the States, and specifically starting in New York. And he was like, oh, this is great time. Like, I know what you've been doing. I kind of been following what you've been doing. Would you be interested in helping us expand online? I really want to start to sell this brand online. And I was like, oh, well, we're not really doing anything else, and I don't really know if I'm qualified for this, but why not? So we did, and we figured it out, and we actually really helped that brand in the first year. I mean, it already had a little bit of a name and it had a really great product behind it, but first year online, we helped it go from literally zero to $2 million. And so I was like, okay, like, this is awesome. We had built a bit of an agency around helping e-commerce businesses grow online, but an agency was not really a business that we wanted to invest in and scale. And so what kind of made the most sense at that time was like, okay, well, why don't we transition into coaching instead? And that way we could actually help people, almost at the grassroots level, really grow their e-commerce businesses. And that was when I started my first podcast. So that was, back in, early mid to mid 2020, I started my podcast, which was all about digital marketing for e-commerce businesses. And it was struggle street. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, we have all these great ideas of like, yes, this podcast is, I'm gonna get so many listeners and I'm gonna get so many people wanting to work with me, and of course none of that. I was like, I don't even know how to start a podcast. I'm just gonna get this $53 microphone I found on Amazon, and I'm just gonna I don't really know how to edit it as well. So whatever I say, that's just gonna be what gets published. So that was what we did. And then, but after a while, because I'm quite economically minded, I was like, oh gosh, we have to make this work. How do I get an ROI on this time that we're spending on podcasting? And so I really started nerding out on what, different people, especially coaches, because I was in that space, were doing, with really using that medium to create this know, like, and trust. And I came across this because I was like, do I even really want to be podcasting anyway? It kind of felt like I really enjoyed it, but it felt like it could just be taking time from something else that I could be doing instead? Like, was it just a hobby for me?
Well,
And
and
then
it's also a lot of work. And in the
it
beginning,
is.
you don't get a lot of results from it.
No,
It's a long-term
it's
marketing
a
game
slog.
plan.
It's a slog. Let's just be open about that, right? But I was like, why am I even doing this? And then I came across, so I started reading this book called Oversubscribed by Daniel Priestley, and he talks about this 7-hour rule. And that's when it sort of started coming together for me, where he was like, people need to spend 7 hours with you in order to create that know, like, and trust so that they become raving fans. And then, like, when you sell anything to them, it becomes a no-brainer because, like, well, they already know you. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is what podcasting actually does. It's really a way for me to create this relationship with people so that they come to know, like, and trust me, because you need this kind of long form content for them to bank up 7 hours with you. You know, social media is great, but that's a lot of 30-second reels or clips that, you know, so I was like, okay, this is where the podcast actually has a role to play. So, okay, how do I make this thing work? So I really nerded out on how do I get people, like listeners, how do I just start to grow, you know, get 1, get 2, get 10, get 20, just like incremental steps. And then once people were in my world, how do I actually really delight them in such a way that they just can't help but take their wallets out and be like, here's my credit card. In a good way, yeah, of course. And
yes, there's no subliminal messaging behind this audio.
Of course not. Of course not. And so when I started to figure that out, and you know, and by no stretch of the imagination am I a copywriter. In fact, I hated doing all of the copy and all of the promotion, all the all of that. I hated doing it, which is really how Cap Show came about. Like all things, you know, businesses come out of the things that you hate doing and you just want to solve that. Because once I started to stumble upon sort of almost the formula of how, and I call it content dripping, of how I can really extrapolate my podcast content in a way that compels people to want to listen to my podcast episode, but then gets them sticking around and getting value from me. Once I kind of figured that out, I was like, oh, okay, I can now figure out a way to automate it, because I don't want to keep writing my blog posts and my promotional email copy and my social media captions. And I don't want to be doing that anymore. So how can I actually figure out a way to have a software that does it for me? So that's what CapShow does. And that's what I do now. That's how I help podcasters market and grow their own podcast.
That is so amazing. There's so many gold nuggets in what you just shared. What I think I love most is that entrepreneurial spirit you have. You know, if something doesn't work, okay, we're just going to try something else. And I think, you know, that's part of the entrepreneurial journey that we don't talk about a lot, is the fact that most entrepreneurs aren't, well, they might be successful in their first business, but many times they're either not successful or they're successful and they hate it because it wasn't really their passion to begin with. It was just something they thought they could do to make money. So totally. Deirdre, let me ask you a question, because this was something you didn't cover. So you had all these franchises. Did you end up selling them?
Yeah, so what we did was, so we moved over 2019 and we still had 5 of our locations, and we had all of our locations going. So we spent, when we made the decision end of 2018 to make the move, we spent a good 6 months, like kind of really making sure that they were systemized. We had our team installed, all of that. And then obviously COVID hit, and fortunately, actually, we had set our stores up to have virtual kitchens already for delivery, for Uber Eats, etc. But at the same time, it wasn't really doing enough to cover the losses that we were making from having to close. So fortunately, 3 of our locations were like their rent was coming up. And so we actually decided not to renew our lease on those. So we actually closed some down. The last stores that were remaining, we actually only sold literally a month ago. So I actually went back to Australia, to Sydney, a few weeks ago, to actually hand it all over, make that transition, etc. But otherwise, we were actually running them completely remotely for the last 3.5 years, which even as I say that now, it kind of blows my mind a little bit. It's like, how in the world do we do that? But we made it happen. And so, yes, so we sold our last remaining stores, just recently.
Okay. So the other question that's just, I'm dying to ask you. So what happened to that manager?
Oh my gosh, yes. So I actually don't know what he's doing right now. Like, we kind of like just cut off all communications. We were able to recover some of our money, which is fortunate because it was a lot of money. But he, had it stashed away, and he was like, I'm just going to give, I'm so sorry, I'm going to give all of this back to you. And then after that, it was like, we had gone to the police, but we didn't have cameras. So we didn't actually have like physical proof of him doing it. So it would have been just too lengthy. It was just going to be too much trouble, really. So yeah, after that, we were like, cool, you give us what you have, basically. And then that's it. That's all we could do. Yeah, we're done. Yeah. So we don't know where he is. We don't know what he's doing. None of that.
Wow. I think one of the lessons in there is, when you're running a business, you really do. And I think especially with franchises, it seems like you've got to have a very hands-on approach, even when you have other people managing it. You have to know the numbers. You have to know what's going on.
It is a bit of a shame because, and definitely, we were very naive about this, because for that particular store, we noticed that our sales were declining, but we would just assumed that it was because the center was quiet, that, people had just lost interest. And so we would actually, like, the somewhat good thing was it forced us to be really quite innovative, because we were like, oh my gosh, okay, we need to like do things differently. We need to find new ways to get people in. And so we didn't think, because you never think that someone is still like, that's just not where our minds went. Right?
No.
Yeah, you just don't.
You're hoping that you can trust this person. You're not thinking that they're going to do you wrong. Exactly. So when you actually look at it, that store was doing really good.
It was. That's the insane thing. It was actually, and that's why I say, like, it was kind of not a bad, good thing that happened. Like, because obviously it's a thing that's like, I wish that didn't happen. But in a way as well, like, as I said, it forced us to be resilient. It forced us to innovate. It forced us to like just think differently, which, like, I think everything worth learning comes out of all these adversities that you face. If that was cruisy, like, we probably would have still been there doing that and growing the business. And fortunately, like, I would not trade any of that for the life that I get to live now and how we get to serve the people that we serve and, all the things that we get to do. So everything happens for a reason. And yeah, I wish that it didn't happen on one hand, but I'm also grateful that it did. It's like one of those weird, things.
So Deirdre, I want to transition here because we got about 12 to 15 minutes left here, and I want to let you loose. But today we want to talk about the 4 steps to getting unlimited traffic to your podcast.
Oh, yes.
So, if you're running a podcast or you're thinking about hosting a podcast, getting it set up, it takes a bit to get it set up. But if you're going to do this, you might as well see results. And it's sort of like when people write a book. They write a book, they order a box of books, it sits in their garage. They start this podcast, they get 3 to 4 episodes in, no one's listened to it. And they kind of go, because, all they thought was of getting this thing started, getting this thing going. They never actually thought through, how are they going to grow this thing? So I want to let you loose to teach on that, because I think that's really important before you get into podcasting, is understand how are you going to drive traffic to this so that you actually see results.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Like, it is, and this is something that actually I figured out even through all of the different iterations of businesses and stuff that I was having, because I was like, how were we able to grow from like being this absolutely unknown thing to having, multi-million-dollar businesses? And then can I actually transplant that strategy of thinking to something like podcast? That was really what it came to when I, mentioned in my story how I was like nerding out on how to grow this podcast. Like, that's actually the work that I did. And so, when I looked back, I realized that there were 4 essentially tiers or steps. I call them tiers because they form what I call the traffic pyramid. So let me just quickly go through those. So the bottom tier the thing that we all do. And I have thoughts about, the effectiveness of this or how to do this, but it's what I call passive organic marketing, right? It's like all the things that we do passively. We passively publish a podcast episode. We passively post on social media saying, oh, this episode just dropped. And what I mean by passive is like we put all these things out into the world and then we sit back and we're like, yeah, someone's going to find it. Someone's just going to like magically stumble across this stuff. And, I'm going to become a hit. And I think we know that doesn't really happen. It doesn't really happen anymore, right? So what we then have to do is we go into the next tier, which is the active organic marketing, right? How do we actually make this stuff that we're creating active? And what I mean by that is how do we, when you look at all the different platforms, all the different channels, all the things that you're publishing, you're putting out there is always a way to make it active, a way to make it work for you. So if you're on social media, for example, the way to make it work for you is that you actually need to be engaging with people. So not just posting, what I call posting and ghosting, like, you just put something out there and you're like, yep, cool, I've done my post for the day, I'm off my app. Like if you want to actually use social media in the way that it was intended to, you have to be social on it. That's the only way that it works. I know that people don't want to hear that. I definitely didn't, but it's the truth, right? Yeah. It's the same with podcasting. When I think about how I actually got my first, even like 2 dozen listeners, it was literally because I was at an event, like for my first, I was at an e-commerce event. And I just happened to talk about my podcast, not in a way of like, oh, really nice to meet you, stranger. Not in that way, right? But in a way that like have a conversation with them. And then I just happened to talk. I was like, oh my gosh. I actually asked this question, which is like, what makes you excited about e-commerce? Like what got you into it? And then they started talking. I was like, oh my gosh, I actually had this amazing conversation with this particular guest. And they mentioned that about this. And then they were like, oh wow, like I want to, and I was like, oh yeah, like please listen to, it's episode 36 of just go there. It just became really natural to talk about it, about a specific episode and not just like listen to my podcast. So that was a really, really great way to just act like an active way to start to actually get that momentum for my podcast. So that's the second tier, is really how do you make all of this organic content that you're creating active?
I liked what you said, because there is the organic, and I mean, I'm going to, posting and ghosting. I love that. Let's just, that was just pure gold. You got to remember that one. But I liked what you said, because it is about active, right? Yeah. You can't just post and ghost. You've got to engage people. One of the things, like I've been putting a lot of my focus in on LinkedIn, because I realized I can't grow on all of them, and it was just too much. Yeah. And I decided LinkedIn was my place to be. But one of the things I've realized, especially with LinkedIn, is that tagging people is part of the process.
Yes.
If you don't tag people, you don't get any views on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's expecting you to tag people, encourage people to take a look at your content. Yeah. So even with the podcast, like today that we're recording, it's actually in November. This won't be posted until January, well, maybe even February. I'm not sure, somewhere in there. But today was the 300th episode of the podcast, went live this morning.
Woohoo! That is so exciting.
I posted about it, but I tagged a bunch of people. I tagged a bunch of my guests that had been on the show, thanking them. So, that's how I was engaging people. And of course, when you tag someone and then they engage, other people see it as well. So it is a very 100%. Active form of organic, because you can't control who it goes out to in the sense of, who else is going to see it. I can engage people. And I have people on LinkedIn who I always comment on their stuff. They always comment on mine. Now, it's not a formal thing. They're just good friends, good clients, whatever. We help each other out. So I think that's, really important. The fact is the active.
Yes.
No posting and ghosting.
Yes, it's so important. That's actually what really gets you the results. Like, thank you for telling us your example, because I cannot agree more. Like that, what you said, that like engaging, being really smart about how you use a platform, like tagging, what are other ways, because that actually starts to go even hashtagging. Yeah. Even as you were talking, you were mentioning that, I was like, that starts to actually go into the third tier of the pyramid, which I call leveraging other people's audiences. Like that's really what you're starting to do. Like, and there are small, simple ways that you can do that, like what you said, like just tag people. And then there are like bigger, somewhat more complex ways that you can do that, like doing, virtual summits and, co-writing books. And like there are other ways, like bigger ways that you can start to leverage other people's audiences. But it all comes under that one umbrella, which is being smart about how you actually engage broadly with the people that have an audience of, people that you want to tap into, really. But you're all helping each other in that way.
Well, one of the easiest ways, and it is relatively easy, it doesn't take a lot, is to actually guest on other people's podcasts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whether you're a podcast host or not, you want to gain authority, you want to leverage other people's audiences. Some of the simple ways, and we don't think about it, guest on podcasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take a lot to create a presence enough. And you don't have to have a big presence to guest on other people's podcasts. You just have to have some things in place. One of the things that, I didn't do with you, because obviously, I had checked you out and you're very well experienced. But some people, I do a pre-interview with them before I let them on the show, because I want to ensure that they're going to be a very high quality guests. My audience knows that every guest is vetted. I don't just bring people on. I want, experts and authorities that are really going to help my audience move their business forward. So I'll do a pre-interview, but there's things that I'm looking for in terms of a guest. First of all, they have to have a well-defined story. I think if you're going to, be a guest on a podcast, have your business story or have your personal story, whatever, category you're in, have that story well rehearsed. Because I ask people, tell me your story.
Yeah.
When I did a pre-interview with them. If you're an expert and you want to share your expertise, then have training prepared. Mm-hmm. You came prepared to talk about those 4 steps. Now, we're putting conversation in between the middle of it, but you have your 4 steps well laid out. The points you want to make. You're giving, the audience that practical. Have that kind of thing fixed ahead of time. Because I asked these pre-interview people, what are you going to share? And if they can't give me sort of a well-defined training with practical steps, they don't get on the show.
Yeah, that's so good. So insightful.
A speaker sheet. It might cost you maybe $50 to $100 to get a speaker sheet done on Fiverr, right? Yeah. And again, you have to have your story. You have to have, the trainings, the different things you teach on. But, it does not take a lot to become a guest. And the same thing, even less, is getting on, doing LinkedIn lives and Facebook lives. Connect with your network. See if they would interview you. Yeah,
it's so good. And like the thing too is, apart from obviously definitely everything you said there, 100% agree with. But the thing is, like, when you said it's not hard to be a guest, it's so true. Like there's so many people who need that. They're looking for guests. They're looking for you, dear listener. Because as Kim said, if you have everything dialed in, you have your story, you have the framework that you're going to teach, people want to hear, like they want to talk to you about that. So go, like, get it. That's the simple message here. Like, go and do that. That is the best way to leverage other people's audiences, for sure.
And there's lots of places where you can go and create a profile and apply to be on people's podcasts. You and I met on Podmatch. Which is one of the best ones that I've experienced so far. There's also matchmaker.fm. These sites are great places where you can go, you can set up your profile, you can connect with podcast hosts, let them know who you are. Podmatch is great because it matches you up with people. It'll send you like 6 matches every so many hours, whatever, and say, I think this person would be a good fit for your show. So it's not hard to guest on other people's podcasts if you so choose. And I've known many people. Now, some of them I don't know personally. I've heard their stories. Okay, I haven't met them. But some of the biggest people just made it a goal to do 100 or 200 podcast guests in a year. And that's how they got their books to New York Times bestseller. They did 200 podcast guesting. I'm actually going to be, one of my goals for 2023 is just to really get out there and do a whole ton, at least 100 podcasts, guest on 100 podcasts next year. So
Awesome.
That's my goal. I think it's just so valuable. So we've covered the three: passive organic marketing, active organic marketing, and leveraging other people's audiences. What's tier 4?
Yes, tier 4 is paid ads. That's kind of the tip of the pyramid. It's, this pyramid is kind of sequential. And yeah, so paid ad, there are different ways that you can do it. For podcasts, I would not recommend like Facebook ads. The best, and this is all an experiment, by the way. I'm talking about this like as a generalization. The best money, if you want to test it, is to actually advertise on podcast apps. And on the smaller ones like the Overcast and like not a be on Spotify, for example, but like that's really because you want to be where there are podcast listeners. You want to be where they are. So that's the highest tier, and probably one that is not for the faint-hearted. So if, for anyone who's just starting to grow their podcast show, stick to the first 3 tiers. That will get you immense amount of listeners already. Paid ads is really just for the people who are trying to break through that point.
Well, and the other thing too is you can also pay to have ads on other people's podcasts. So not even just the channels like Stitcher and all that. I don't even know if you could pay to be on Apple, but the smaller ones, like you said. But you can also, a lot of podcasts sell ad space. That's how they monetize their podcasts. They sell ad space.
Yeah.
So, and usually they don't do that until they have a pretty decent audience because they want to earn money. So they build the audience and then they sell these spots. So you can even, approach podcast hosts. If you're listening to a podcast that's right for your target market and they do ads in there, then you can approach that person and talk to them about it and say, how much do you charge to advertise?
100%.
So do you have a final thought for us today, Deirdre?
Oh my gosh, I have a lot of thoughts. So I don't know if I can condense it into one. But I mean, like ultimately everything, and I hope that this was also apparent in my journey, but everything is about, you just have to do it and see. Like you could listen to someone else talk about how to grow podcasts and they will talk about a particular strategy and some will have, and we're all right? Yes. Like everyone is right because we've all done it ourselves, but you just have to choose the one way that you're going to do it. And I love what you said when you're like, I'm just going to focus on LinkedIn. And I know that was about a channel and I'm talking about strategy, but either way, at whatever level you decide to want to implement, just choose one and just start doing it, and test it and keep going. And if you fail, like I have many times, pick yourself back up, dust it off, because it's only made you stronger and hopefully made you more confident in your ability to actually even know that you can fail however many times and still make it work. That's really the important thing about getting into entrepreneurship, or really anything, is like building that confidence in yourself to know that you're capable of doing anything.
Yeah, you know what? I so agree. You have to just pick yourself up and keep going. I want to give you a moment because you have an amazing piece of software called Capshow. So why don't you just quickly talk about it and then tell the audience how they can connect with you.
Yeah, for sure. So Capshow is a software, as Kim mentioned, that helps podcasters. It's really the fastest way for podcasters to market and grow their podcast. And what I mean by that is that there are different ways that you can obviously market and grow podcasts, but what you need to have in order to do that is the copy. It is the written things. It's the stuff that I mentioned before. I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to write an email to my list about I hate writing. And that's why we created Capshow. So what it does is, in under 10 minutes, when you upload an audio file, it creates your episode title, your description, your show notes, your social media captions, your promotional email, your blog post, your LinkedIn article, your YouTube description, a full transcript. It does all of that in under 10 minutes for your podcast episode.
I played around with it this morning because you get to do one for free. And I was very impressed. I mean, I've tried out a lot of AI stuff, and obviously I'm a good, strong writer, but I was pretty impressed with what it came out. I'm like, okay, I got to fix up a few little things here, but definitely a lot quicker than me writing it all out myself.
Well, exactly. And we would never profess that this is a replacement for a human. It is exactly what you said. Like, let's make the process quicker. But yeah, a human is still going to have to get in there and just edit, like run their eye over it. I actually get a little bit cringe. Like, I cringe a little bit when I see a user just like copy and paste straight from Capture, and I'm like, oh no, don't do that. Like, bring a little bit of your own flavor. Like, the way that I use it, I want to add my personality. So tone of voice, it's like I just make those edits to it. But it cuts down something that, for me used to take like 2 to 4 hours to like 30 minutes. What better ROI on your time is there than that? Like, so
you definitely want to check it out, because I went into the transcript, and according to the transcript, I'm Tim Thompson Tinder.
I mean, if you ever needed to have an alter ego.
Well, Deirdre, we are out of time for today. I want to thank you, audience, for just being there. Today of the November 29th that we're recording this, the 300th episode is being released. And I am just so thankful for you, the listeners, and how you have supported this podcast. And I just wanted to end with a huge thank you. So this has been Deirdre Tshien and Kim Thompson-Pinder on the Author to Authority podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the very next episode. Bye now.
You've been listening to the Author to Authority podcast. The extraordinary word ninja, Kim Thompson-Pinder, has helped over 200 entrepreneurs, professionals, speakers, and coaches write and publish their books that have become incredible marketing tools for their business. And many of those have gone on to become Amazon best-selling authors and have used their books to land high-level clients and get on big stages. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at www.authortoauthoritypodcast.com. See you next time.